Welcome to the Servant Leaders Mindset channel, where we are transforming lives through servant leaders. Up next.
Since leaving Iraq, I've had a pretty strong faith, but just there was one particular case when I was at Duke University, and it ended up being someone that we knew very well. So there was an educator, a nursing educator, that worked at the VA hospital and at Duke, and everyone knew her quite well, and she had collapsed in a stairwell, like an unwitnessed cardiac
Everyone,
arrest.
welcome to the show. Today, I have the distinguished honor to introduce you to Dr. Colonel Josh McConkey. Dr. McConkey is an award-winning, best-selling author and an esteemed emergency physician with over 2 decades of clinical experience. He served as a professor at Duke University and maintains board certification in emergency medicine. With 22 years of military experience, Dr. McConkey now commands the 459th Aeromedical Staging Squadron in the U.S. Air Force Reserves. A devoted father of 3, his greatest passion lies in shaping future American leaders alongside his wife, Elsa, in Apex, North Carolina. Welcome to the show, Dr. McConkey.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the very warm introduction.
You're welcome. Like I said, you deserve it. First, I'd like to jump right in and start about talking about your book. And the book is titled, Be the Weight Behind the Spear. What does the title mean, and what is the overarching message of the book?
Some great questions. So, Be the Weight Behind the Spear, the title for the book, as a military commander, it's my leadership ethos. Be the weight behind the spear. I've been very fortunate to work with some special operators and some special forces in the past, and these are teams that we call really tip of the spear. So to understand how you can be the weight behind the spear, kind of understanding what that tip of the spear is certainly kind of helps. And these are the men and women that kick down doors, they take down bin Laden. This is the team that was called in to rescue the kids that were stranded in the cave systems in Thailand in 2018. It's like picking up the bat phone. This is the people that you call. So when you work with men and women like that, it's very humbling. What you realize is that every single one of these, like superheroes, these guys are superheroes for sure. And every one of them has a teacher, a coach, a favorite, a mentor, or a family member that gave them the amazing confidence to do what they do. And I realized very quickly I can't kick down doors and do those things. I save lives. I don't take them. So I can be the weight behind the spear. And that's what the best resource that we have in this entire country is people. It's teachers, coaches, volunteers, mentors, and families. And that's what we need to be the weight behind the spear for our future leaders. So that's the title. And that's really the overarching theme of the book, is that what you do every single day matters. Get out there and make a difference. Everybody has something different to give, but I need Americans to be the weight behind the spear.
Excellent, excellent. So essentially, this book is about teaching the current generation how to equip the next generation for leadership. So what are some of the most important values we should be teaching or passing on to the next generation?
So some very important leadership tips, that's served me very well in leadership. I've learned from great leaders. I've learned from bad leaders as well. Sometimes you don't appreciate the really good leaders until you've had a bad one. But, just one in particular, one that everybody knows is Coach K, like the legendary Duke basketball coach. I was a professor there, and he had great points on ownership, accountability, and he held people to standards. He didn't talk about rules. So taking ownership of where you're at, you can't blame other people. Sometimes there's like this victim mentality that goes around. Some of that is attributed to this younger generation. Everybody got a participation trophy. Everybody got a ribbon. And that's not reality. That's not real life. I mean, there's winners and there's losers. And there's nothing wrong with losing as long as you learn from it and do something about that. So like taking ownership of that, accountability is incredibly important. That's one of the biggest things as a military commander that I've learned. And then just the standards. like of your team and the people that you surround yourself with. Nobody likes rules, but when you talk about standards, and if you're not meeting that standard, you have those discussions with people. But those three simple, leadership tips right there have worked very well for me as a military commander.
Excellent. And you talk about the culture of blaming that we now have. It's funny because I had a show recently that I was talking to a guy who wrote a whole book on accountability, and a very, very interesting that's a huge problem. And some people are saying that we're hardwired to do that, but once we realize that, okay, then we have to step back and say, let's take responsibility or be accountable for our actions.
Yeah,
so
nobody to blame. Just take
exactly.
that accountability.
Exactly. So I believe that one of the most important tools we can teach young people is how to navigate adversity. You use a lot of examples in your book to show how others helped you. Can you give our audience one example where you were faced with tremendous adversity and was able to succeed because of the help of somebody else?
Well, and you talk about some very important guidance in your life. For me, like my faith has been extremely important. And, as a physician, back in 2018, I owned an emergency department, part of an emergency department with some colleagues. And it was a business that was doing very well. And I, coming from absolutely nothing, my dad is a railroader, my grandfather was a railroader, and so was my great grandfather. So I was the first McConkey to go to college. So having a business where you're making a tremendous amount of money, I had a situation where the CEO of the hospital, who actually owned more than 50% ownership, which is really important when you're in Texas for business law, I found out he was doing what I felt was illegal activity, some very shady things with Medicare and Medicaid. He started embezzling money, and then he was writing off business expenses from other businesses, like through our business. They were clearly not legit. And I had applied for a national security position as an Air Force reservist on the National Security Council. So when you're going for that level of a position and they're asking you all kinds of questions, and you very much realize that your business is compromising that, I approached him, and he offered me initially a $3.4 million bribe, which is crazy.
Wow.
And I, my faith and just the way I was raised, I had some select words for him. I'm not going to compromise my integrity for a single penny. I'm a commander and a colonel in the United States Air Force. So it got very bad. He tried to bankrupt the company. And then at the very end of it, he actually threatened my family, and I had to move my family overseas.
Oh, my. Wow.
It was right smack dab during COVID. The lawsuit that we filed to prevent him from bankrupting it got frozen in the courts because it was the middle of COVID, and the FBI was tied up with so much other stuff. They basically said, hey, it's kind of a gray area. This is kind of a business issue, so it's not our problem. And, even after he threatened the family, they were like, well, he hasn't done anything yet, so we're sorry. And, without, my family and friends and a very strong faith, that was probably the worst position I've ever been in. Mm. And I relied on those people to get me through it. It was my wife's actually idea to move overseas to Australia to get away from the situation because it was getting pretty bad. But at the end of the day, I lost about $5 million, which is mind-boggling. But, my integrity is intact, and I guess that's just the way I was raised. So I did the right thing. He'll probably end up in jail eventually, but it just doesn't help me financially.
Wow. That's
crazy story, huh?
Yeah, that is. But it's important to have a team of people around you, and I think we don't teach young people that. We as adults, we know we need a support system in place, and so. Do you have, in your life, a support system that you said, like the story that I read in your book, the chaplain, speaking of your faith, the chaplain
yes.
who, when you did the tour in Iraq and you were going to extend your tour and you were trying to decide, and it really was a very important decision because it could have been, your life was at stake. You didn't realize that later on that area would be bombed and you would have been right there. So it really did, your life depended on that advice.
Yeah, that was Chaplain Jim Higgins, and then Joe Kelly, a very good friend and one of my physician assistants, but the two of them, had I made a different decision, had I actually stayed in Iraq and volunteered to extend, my flight surgeon trailer was rocketed 2 weeks later. It was right during noon. I would have been sitting there for sure. I would have been killed. So yeah, it's kind of crazy how those things work out, but my faith has carried me through a lot of difficult situations.
Wow, that's amazing. And then you do a whole chapter on decision making, which I think is an important tool, especially how it related to you as a leader, that sometimes decisions are not so black and white. And sometimes you don't have enough time to gather all the information, go through that decision tree or decision steps, but you just really have to. And you also talked about emergency rooms, that a lot of time the lag there has to do with perhaps physicians not really wanting to make decisions very quickly or on the fly or whatever they need in order to move progress along. Can you talk a little bit more about that, about decision making, especially when the decision is not very clear and you don't have time really to, you were talking about when you're working on a patient that is dying or whatever, this emergency situation, you have to choose which system you're going to keep going and maybe forfeit the other. It's just there's no good answer here, right?
Yeah, they're
Explain
not,
how you approach that.
Yeah, they're not easy decisions. So there's so many decisions that you make that if you did it independently, you clearly would not do something that would sacrifice like the ability of the heart to function, or for the kidneys, or for the liver. But there's many situations when you're, attacking a problem and there's a medical illness where one medication you give is going to help the heart but hurt the kidney, or help the kidney but just destroy the liver. You try not to do anything that would just sacrifice things completely. But the big trauma that with Kiwan Amy, my friend and my colleague Kiwi, that was on a motorcycle bike, where he had a horrific decision to make. There's always a decision. You might not like the decisions that you have to make, but you do have to make one of them. And so when he was driving back to Durham, North Carolina, after Air Force drill weekend, a car pulled right out in front of him. And he had only two decisions to make. The first decision was to veer off to the left straight into head-on traffic on a motorcycle. Probably not a good choice. The other one was to just drive straight into the hood of the vehicle because it was coming out and he couldn't have turned right. And so he just hit it head on and flew over the top and just had horrific injuries. And just the decisions that you have to make in a split second, they were both, you would never make a decision to do either of those. But at that particular point, you had one or two choices. And so you took the one choice, and he's alive because of it. He wouldn't have survived the other one for sure. But there were some severe medical issues. It was pretty gruesome, but literally he had slid across the concrete, and it kind of tore off most of his face and his eyelids, and the sun baked his cornea, and he was blind. So that was the big injury. But the trauma issues with the lung and liver and multiple bone fractures. He's very lucky to be alive. Just we all have decisions, and sometimes they're not always great choices, but there's always a choice, and that decision making is a skill. And the big point of that was just you have to learn those decision making skills. They're generally not innate, but they're not always the best of choices.
Interesting, and that is definitely a skill that's needed. So you claim in your book that by equipping the next generation for leadership, it's crucial to the success of national security. And you explain make the connection between national security and having and equipping the next generation. Even those that may not go into politics or you did run for Congress.
Yeah, boy, I got outspent by $12 million by somebody in the primary who had a dad with a lot of money. It's mind blowing, but that's that's the way it works.
Well, you can always do it again.
Yeah, I don't have $12 million.
Yeah, well, I still think that you should never give up, especially if it's something that you desire.
Doors always, God's going to put you in position to be successful. And when he needs you, he's going to let you know. So I certainly don't close any doors. Just the ability to adapt and overcome, is a really important skill that what I've seen as a military commander, a lot of they just lack resiliency. And then as an emergency physician, I see some of this younger generation that comes in with the anxiety and the depression, and it's really sad when you see the suicides, because you have to talk with the families and just rips your heart out. But between that and my time as a military commander, I just, we have to teach these skills: decision making, adaptability, resiliency, and those things do contribute later on to national security, because I'm not going to be around forever. I'm still relatively young. I'm 47, but I got 23 years of service, and I can't serve forever. I got to hand the keys to somebody. And right now, I don't know a lot of people that say, "Man, this next generation is just good to go." So we got a lot of work to do, and we take ownership over that as a country, and that's the whole purpose. That's my whole be the weight behind the spear.
Excellent. So in America, no one needs to tell you this, that we are extremely divided.
Ooh.
And how could we begin to mend this breach, or at least get the next generation to start thinking about how they could, help, things that they can do to help unite the country, or what should we be teaching about that? Because we're not modeling it. And I think part of leadership is really modeling. You can't tell someone else, "Oh, we need to unite the country," and they see you fighting.
Yeah.
So
it's the most divided I've seen the country, generationally, politically. It's been very chaotic, but realizing that we have so much more in common than we do that separates us. And if you focus on like the children and the younger generation and the future of the country, I think that would give us something to hold on to and move forward. Very simple things, like my wife's a teacher, my mom and aunt are both teachers. They've both retired. But we need to empower our teachers again, to hold kids accountable and teach these types of leadership skills. These skills should be coming from the home, from your church, from your community. And oftentimes that hasn't been the case. And so at the very least, we need to empower our teachers to be able to at least hold kids accountable. Just the story, my mom, like the last couple of years as a teacher, she could not, they would not let her fail anybody. They could show up to school and do absolutely nothing, zero, not a single thing. And she was not allowed to fail anybody. They couldn't fail them. So that when you lack that very simple accountability, just basics at school, and that's how they start. How is this person going to function in a real job? Let alone getting into college, So there's just the basics. We just need to teach the basics.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because just today, a article came out in the Baltimore Sun talking about students who are passed on to the next grade in high school, but they're not attending school. The average absentee rate was like 60 days. For the school year. So how can you miss 60 days of the school year and be passed on to the next grade? But it was just today, a headline in the news about education. So definitely,
Wow.
That's a huge problem.
Yeah, you're not giving your kids the tools they need to be successful. That's very clear.
Absolutely. And I think that relates to everything, crime and everything else that happens. It's all interrelated. So I just want to let's get back to the medical field and pivot a little bit. So research shows that many doctors are leaving the field, and that's making it difficult to access healthcare in this country, or good healthcare. And there are other positions within the medical field that people are leaving, but how would you describe the rewards of choosing to be a doctor to someone who was younger, who was thinking about making perhaps something in the or some position in the medical field? How would you convince them that it was a good field to choose?
Well, it's a fantastic career if you really focus on helping people. I mean, saving lives. The burnout rate, and it's gotten much worse after COVID for sure. I've practiced medicine over 20 years, and it's very difficult. So, the career itself is amazing. my stepmom was a nurse growing up, and so I heard so many stories, just wild, crazy stories in the emergency departments back in Omaha. I grew up in rural western Nebraska. I've always been an adrenaline junkie, and so you don't have to do all the crazy adrenaline stuff to be a doctor. And there's so many different allied health career fields that you can do. Radiology, nursing, even just working in the lab, phlebotomy, drawing the blood. I mean, there's so many healthcare careers that if you're looking for a steady, consistent job that pays well and you can literally work almost anywhere on planet Earth and always find a job, like healthcare is definitely the place to be. It's been very stressful the last few years, with the whole COVID epidemic, but there's there's a high burnout rate in emergency medicine for sure. But I think I've been an adrenaline junkie, so that was a good choice for me.
You actually witnessed some miracles, some people who were not supposed to make it in your time of practicing medicine. Can you share one of those stories? And that's my second question, follow up to that, is what impact did that have on your theology?
Since leaving Iraq, I've had a pretty strong faith. But, just there was one particular case when I was at Duke University, and it ended up being someone that we knew very well. So there was an educator, a nursing educator, that worked at the VA hospital and at Duke. And everyone knew her quite well, and she had collapsed in a stairwell, like an unwitnessed cardiac arrest, which generally the survival rates on that are extremely, extremely low. So nobody even knows how long she had been down before they found her. So that bodes extremely poor. And then it was found there was a big pulmonary embolism or a blood clot.
Wow. And
there was, being there, it's I'm trying not to get a little bit emotional. I've talked about it in the past, but, someone that you knew so well and that it was not survivable, that particular event. And one of the other attendings was running that code. I was kind of just present helping out with some things. And they actually got a pulse back. It took quite some time. It literally witnessed a miracle that was not survivable, with that length of time that she had been down, and there was literally no pulse as long as we were doing the chest compressions for quite some time. And ended up giving some clot breaking medication, which I've done it 100 times. I've never seen it work for someone that had been down that long, and she actually survived and had a good mental outcome. So for that type of event, I mean, you may get some survivors, but really generally nobody has a good neurologic outcome on that and walks out of the hospital and actually works their job again. And on this particular case, it was a miracle. So I mean, just to strengthen my faith, I've always felt that God kind of works through my hands. I can't save everybody. I mean, if He wants to take somebody, He's going to take them. But I've worked extremely hard and studied very hard to save as many people as I can. And you're not always 100% successful, and that's always hard to deal with. But there's sometimes you'll see those that there's like no chance of survival that make it, and there's really no other explanation.
Do you silently pray when you're working on a patient?
I certainly have. And more when I was a resident, and there's people that are in a hospice, or some of the the elder patients that you're kind of expecting, and the nurse will call you in the room, kind of just waiting for the second when they actually die. And I've very many times I try to hold their hand and just say a little prayer, and before I've pronounced somebody.
Wow. Or even maybe come and tell the family that the person has passed on.
Oh yeah, if the family's
that takes a lot of courage.
Room,
yeah.
Yeah, that's the hardest part of the job for sure, is talking with families, especially really sudden, unexpected deaths and then pediatric deaths. That's a killer. That's hard to deal with.
Interesting. So let's pivot here a little bit. I wanted to know what are your thoughts on how technology is marketed to youth and the potential negative effects that they may have. And you have children of your own, so you really can relate to this.
Yeah, I've got
for
3 children.
For example, recently there was an incident in the news where a 14-year-old committed suicide because he got attached to an AI character in a game and he was one of those kids that was sort of bullied and not didn't have a lot of friends and those kinds of things. And so now children who are lonely are turning to AI for companionship. How can adults? His mother did notice that he was withdrawing, and she tried. She really did. But it appears she has. It showed some of the action she took in order to try to pull him back. But what are your thoughts on that, and how can teachers and coaches and volunteers be a little bit more aware of what is happening with a child?
Yeah, that was a case. I remember reading about that. Very sad and just very poignant as well. It just really illustrates that a lot of the social media and some of this AI technology, like the ages like below 18, certainly below age 16, we need to have some restrictions on access to that for these particular types of situations. And with social media, like the development of the human brain, it's so addictive and is so detrimental to their development and ability to function in real life. It's been very well studied. I believe Australia just outlawed social media under age 16, period. Like the parents now don't even have the ability to kind of sign a waiver to get them an account. So, more research is coming out on that every day, but it shows how powerful that can be. I mean, you've got a young 14-year-old kid who they really get absorbed into the alternate reality of AI, and they don't then function in real life. And that's what you've seen during some of this COVID generation. These kids were shut out of schools, they were shut out of their churches, and they sat there on their iPads, and their only interaction with friends or colleagues or even in the school setting was over an iPad. And that really becomes an alternate reality. There's a great movie, Ready Player One, that came out a couple of years ago of just pretty much the future, what it's going to look like with AI and just people living in video games, because real life is hard and real life is difficult and to maintain relationships. And so it's way easier to just ignore real life and live in an alternate reality of AI generated characters and video games, and the dopamine hits, from social media. It's not real. But for these children, they don't understand that. And for me, I was born in 1977, so none of this existed when I was growing up, and I'm sure it would have had a negative effect on me as well. It's very dangerous and has to be, watched very closely by parents and teachers and people in those leadership positions. That was a very sad case.
It really was. How do you and your wife talk to your children about technology and the use of it? How do you guide them along with that?
Yeah, we are the not cool parents. Everyone else gets to do this, and we have my kids were 11. They just turned 12, but a couple months ago when they were 11, like, how come you won't take us to the new Deadpool movie? I'm like, you guys, you're 11 years old. I've seen the movie. It's fantastic, amazing movie. It's not appropriate for an 11-year-old. So, well, this person's parent is this, and this person's parent gives them access to Instagram and Facebook and social media. So, yeah, we're the not cool parents. So our kids do not have any social media, and we're not taking them to Deadpool. So that's too bad.
Yeah, well, you have when you said both of them, you have twins, right?
I have twins. The twins are now 12. And then we have a 13-year-old who'll be 14 here in January. So we went 0 to 3 kids in 19 months.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a shocker.
That was fun, huh?
Oh, it changed a lot. I moved here to North Carolina for a position with a very high performance team at Fort Bragg, and quickly realized that with 3 kids of that age, I was going to have to choose between a really cool career or family. And I chose family. I made the right decision. But had I chose to do that career, there's no way we would have survived that. Elsa would have left and moved back to Florida, I'm sure.
So how can volunteers be thoughtful about how to engage their communities? What should they do? Because a lot of people too, at least, again, the data shows this, that not a lot of people are having children. And churches are emptying out of their, children, which is really hard because that's another thing, in terms of volunteers, a lot of times these things were kind of done in those centers of engagement, church, places like that. And like you said, schools being important because kids have to go to school. But should even the church, should leadership in the church be reaching out to places like schools and into the community because they're not coming to them. So the question becomes what are some ways that those who want to teach those values? And I think the point that you make in the book that is really very important, and you use it by using a lot of examples, and that is how these little things meant such a great deal to you and to your family, to your formation, the formation of your faith, but also the formation of you as an individual, that everything counts. You may not see it, but I think there was somebody in the book that you had later on encountered and told them how great a difference they made. It was one of your teachers, Mr. Allman.
Yeah, Rocky Allman. Oh.
So I think, too, it's important to go back and tell those people how much you meant to their lives as well.
Yeah, I've tried to do as much of that. Like some of them aren't alive any longer. Not that I'm that old, but some of the teachers were kind of older in their careers, but I've reached out to as many of them as I can. Facebook is good with that. You can find people, but everybody has something different to give, and it's you may have something different to give. Maybe the great question I had at a book reading a couple of days ago was, do you need to be like 100% ready before you coach or you take up a leadership position? And it was such a good question because, no, you don't. Nobody is ever 100% ready. Mm-hmm. You don't even know, and you learn so much from just volunteering to do that. Coaching some youth sports, getting involved in some committees in your church or school or community, just your HOA, and maybe you just really love animals. So go volunteer at the animal shelter, and one of those animals may get adopted to somebody who needs like a emotional support animal. There's just things tied together, and what you do every single day matters. If you're just sitting just in your home, if you find the time to have dinner with your family, just start right there. Just have dinner. Sit down, take 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it takes you to sit down and have a family dinner. Just show your kids that you care and that you're making that time. You want to ask them about their day. How'd your day go? What went well? What didn't go well? And could you have made some different decisions that could have affected the outcome of that day? So by doing something that simple, you're helping instill confidence in your kids. They can go out, they can explore the world, make some decisions. They make some bad decisions. Hopefully they're learning from them. You can talk about that. But just starting right there, there's very simple things that you can do.
Excellent. Excellent. So if people want to buy your book or they want to learn more about you, what's the best way for them to reach you? I know you can buy the book on Amazon, can't you?
Yeah. Amazon, Barnes & Noble.
Do you have a website? Or?
There is a website for the book. So waitbehindthespear.com, WEIGHT, waitbehindthespear.com. And I have now launched a nonprofit organization as well.
Oh, wow.
The
Wonderful.
Wait Behind the Spear Foundation. And that's waitbehindthespear.com, just /foundation. And you can learn more about how you can contribute, engage your community, volunteer, and just, help move America forward. I mean, that's what we need, those volunteers. We need more weight behind America's spear, and what you do every single day matters.
Excellent. Well, I highly recommend the book. I don't often recommend books, but
Nice.
it's a very good read, a very engaging read. It will keep your attention, and I could see the adrenaline in the stories that you tell.
Yeah. I've lived through some crazy things. I'm very blessed. I'm very lucky, and just trying to pay that forward.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. and share this very valuable information.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.